Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of Guitar Journeys. And I have a very special guest with me today. It is J.C. Swift. And I have 5 questions, as you know from seeing past episodes. There's only a few of them that I ask everybody that comes on the program the same 5 questions. And the idea is that we want to try to keep things on the positive spin and share our experiences and perhaps see ourselves in another guitar player and have that point of relation, and also community building is another part of it. And of course, storytelling. That's a big part of what the Guitar Journeys is about, is telling our stories and how we got to play guitar, what got us into it, where we are currently, where we want to go. So each guest that comes on gets to share that with you guys. And hopefully you can see yourself in somebody else. And without further ado, I'm going to launch into question number 1 for you, Jay. And thank you for doing this, by the way. I appreciate it. And I read your bio on your website, which we'll get to later on, perhaps. And I figured this is the perfect episode to share with everybody. So without further ado, here's question number 1 for you. How did you become interested in guitar?
All right. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me on the show. I super appreciate being here. I'm happy to be here. All right. So question number 1, how did I get started on the guitar? So my father was gifted a 6-string and a 12-string from my mother when I was probably, 5 years old. And it was put in my hands. That it was a Christmas gift. So it was put in my hands that morning to, by my dad, like, all right, let's see if you can do it type situation. And apparently I was able to do it. So that was the beginning. Right. And for many years, I would play with those guitars whenever I had the chance. When you're that young, it's kind of hard to stay focused on, any one thing. Right. I mean, there were like Star Wars toys and G.I. Joes to play with as well.
Right.
So I had to work through all that too. So dating myself just a little bit there. But yeah, so then as I got older, I was playing more and more. My mother always tells me that my first song that I played on guitar was "When the Saints Come Marching In," which was great. Like I said, I've always liked to hope it was that metal version of "When the Saints Come Marching In" that I was playing. I don't know if it really was. And then I played with the guitar, but I wasn't doing anything serious with it until I really got serious about it after I heard Def Leppard on the radio. And what happened was I was driving home in a black Mazda pickup truck that my parents had, heard the song on the radio, and I just remember from the first couple of notes just being like, wow, what is that? Like, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. I got out of the truck, hopped on my bike, rode the 1.5 miles downhill the whole way to Strawberries, bought that record, hooked that plastic bag on the handlebars of my bike, and I rode uphill all the way back home for the other 1.5 miles. And I just wore that record out listening to it. And that was the first time I started trying to like emulate what was being played right when I was playing the guitar. And then I played high school football, and that was arguably the worst high school football player to ever play in Waterford High School.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you're 5'7" and you're like 90 pounds. Like, this is not the sport you should have chose, right? So, but I did learn how to take a beating. I did learn that. So there were lessons to be learned there.
Yeah, sure.
But in that high school locker room, the seniors would control the music, and they came in one day and this song was playing, and I was just like, my God, what is that? And it's Ronnie James Dio.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And it was Holy Diver. And then, after that was, they're like, oh, you like that? You like Rainbow in the Dark? And I was just like, that was it. Like, at this point now, I'm like, oh my God. Now I'm invested. Right. So now I'm really trying to learn how to play. Right. And then I discovered other guitar players, and the number one was George Lynch. I heard George and I was like, I want to be able to play like that. Like, this guy, like, his guitar soloing was just something about it that resonated with me. And I had a great, it just made me feel great.
Yeah.
And so I learned to play guitar by listening to those Dokken albums. And I used to go play with other people, and my guitar would be out of tune because I didn't know that the Dokken tuned down a half step. I mean, I knew nothing about music, right? So I was just tuning my guitar by ear, and everything I was hearing was E flat. Right. So that's how, I'd always have to tune up. Right. And it wasn't until I actually bought a tuner, and I did go take a few lessons, and they, that was kind of like kind of got me on the road as to, hey, you're supposed to be tuned to E, and here's a tuner for $25. Try using
Right.
this. And, so I mean that was kind of the real thing. But that was the beginning, right? Of my love for the guitar, and it took over my life. I think my dad was worried about me because, like, if I wasn't at school or at my part-time job, I was in the basement playing my guitar. Like, no girlfriends, nothing, no parties. I didn't drink. I didn't do any drugs. I wasn't doing anything except for playing my guitar. And my dad was like, he's in high school and he has no social life. He doesn't even have any friends. He just has his guitar, And I had bought this old Robin. It's old now, but I have a Robin and I still have it. It's which Robin doesn't exist anymore in Texas, but I had that, and then I traded up to that was my first guitar, and I traded up to a Les Paul custom, which I
Okay.
played like into my 18, into early 20s, which was, a great guitar, like it weighed 45 pounds, right? You know what I mean? It
After
weighed
an hour, weighed
45 pounds,
4,500
and it was
pounds.
really tough to play up in that upper register because of my size and how I was kind of holding it at the time. But I'm not so sure if I, was more interested in looking like Randy Rhoads, or like, but that was part of the thing. Like I was a big Randy Rhoads fan as well. Cause like, who didn't like Ozzy back then? Right. Especially when he, got Jake and
Oh,
Zach. I mean, he's always had so many amazing
great
guitar
players.
players, right?
Hmm.
When Bark at the Moon came out, I was like, oh my God, this is like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
The music scene was just so great then, and it really sparked, my love for the instrument and actually, wanting to become a better guitar player, playing bands, and sparked my desire to like write my own music, even at that age,
Yeah.
because even then, I wasn't really interested in playing cover bands. I always wanted to write my own stuff. So, and that's pretty much how I got started, started as my dad, thinking it would be funny to hand his 6-year-old son this big Goya 12-string guitar that was bigger than me. I'm
Right.
trying to hold on to it. I can't get my arms around it,
Cat.
right?
Yeah.
And then it sparked this infatuation, which is, which I'm still kind of, how I am now, right? Like, not a day goes by where I don't play or practice,
Yeah.
So, and my left hand can attest to that because it's sore every day, like it
Yeah.
got some kind of workout at the gym.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It's, you find those players that just, inspire you. It could be, a well-known player or just, just somebody, it could be somebody in your family, It's just one of those amazing things that, links you to, there's an experience and it links you into, a lifelong activity. And sometimes we're not even aware. We just do it, and that's the thing that's really nice that I think that people just even hearing you talk about how excited you got from hearing something played, and it's like, I have to know this, I have to get into this, what is it, and then you go and you start to gather information, and especially as we've come up through playing, you discover these different players and you discover the family tree of other players who've played with this one and that one. It's pretty amazing stuff, and then you experience it on your own terms, and a lot of that information sometimes comes from a teacher, which leads me into the next question. Are you self-taught or did you take lessons?
Okay, so what I touched on was is that I was self-taught at the beginning. I with the learning from those Dokken albums, right? And I did take 3 or 4 lessons, in Brian's Guitars in Groton, Connecticut, because that's where it was at the time. And I couldn't even tell you who the guitar teacher was, right? He was a younger guy. He was a very talented guy, and it just it wasn't working for me, right? You know what I mean? I don't think I was ready to sit down in a classroom type situation at that point and take things in, right?
Right.
So I decided not to do the lessons, and I just kept listening to other music and playing other things. I got into, obviously I talked about it before, um, you know, learning Ronnie James Dio songs, Ozzy songs, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, the whole gamut of everything that anybody in our age group that was a guitar player probably listened to, right? And and just kind of went with that and did that for many, many, many years And then when I was, I, I, I kind of stopped playing when I got married and had a family, like I had, like many people, I got married when I was 21. And I think around 23, it was like, I'm just not going to be able to do this, work full time and have a family.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I had made commitments to my wife and stuff like that. So, I, kept to those commitments and I did that. And, I think it was like 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And, my son's 27 now. And, I got just something in me was like, I can do this now. Like I should do this now. I'll be done with work. I'll be retired from my job next year. And I was just inspired to do it. And I started playing around. I was looking for bands to play with. And I ended up going into I recorded an EP of 5 songs, which is on my website.
Oh.
And I finished that EP and I was incredibly happy with it. I worked with producer Steve Judge from 747 Studios, and he was amazing. Anybody has a chance to work with him, they definitely should. Um, but when I finished those 5 songs, I realized that because I really didn't kind of continue my music education in that time period off, I was just playing my guitar, that I finished those 5 songs and I was like, wow, like I was doing that 5th song and I was out of chops. I'm like, that's all I know. Right. You know what I'm saying? And like, yeah, you could learn other stuff. So I went on a search for a teacher and I needed somebody that, well, I knew I wanted somebody that was, one, really good. I needed somebody that knew their stuff there. I needed somebody that knew their music theory backwards and forwards. And I wanted somebody who had been there, done that. I didn't, a local guy wasn't going to do it for me. And I was very lucky to land a spot as one of Rusty Cooley's students.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Right. So, yeah. So like, I got in contact with him and he was like, I have one spot. I'm like, you don't anymore. I just took it. Right.
Right.
And it's forever. So get used to it. So
yeah. You're not getting rid of me, man. I'm in it for the long haul.
Yeah. Right. So, so I've been working with Rusty for about 6 months now, and it's an incredible experience. Anybody who hasn't heard Rusty play, you should definitely take some time. Go to YouTube, go to rustycooley.com. You can go to YouTube and check out Rusty Cooley. You can check out his damn band Day of Reckoning and Outworld. All right, and it's just amazing stuff. And I'm learning music theory, which I never learned before, and it's great because he doesn't teach it the way he teaches it to you. He's teaching it to you as he's teaching you other things. Right. So you're learning the music theory without actually sitting in front of a book learning music theory, right? It's not boring, right? And we end up picking apart things he's explaining to me. Like even with songs that I write that he listens to, he'll sit there and go, but okay, do you realize that this is the chord progression, this is a triad, this is what you're doing? And he's just incredibly helpful. I mean, in every aspect of everything I've had to learn so far, and whether it's music theory, technique, how to properly practice, and even going over how to properly use your gear, like how to properly use an effects loop, like how to properly use, a distortion pedal, or an overdrive pedal, or a boost pedal. We went through my rig from front to back one night, because I was like, it's just, I'm happy with my sound, but when I play live, and he's like, all right, well, let's do it. And we did for 45 minutes. We just went from where do you plug your guitar into? All right, switch that around, move that, right? And we put my whole rig together, which was pretty wild because there was a whole bunch of stuff I didn't know.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, you get more than just, okay, my chops well is kind of running dry, but then you get the extra, which is, it's such a vital thing, especially now. You mentioned the gear, because that's the stuff like music theory, you learn. I like to call it functional theory, where you learn what you need to play and you can do that, where you can create something and then after the fact you go, okay, I did this, and this. And the gear the same way, where it's like you have a teacher who you can sit with. Like my teacher was the same way when I learned. Like it was all about performance and what leads to performance, And so to find somebody like you, like with Rusty, and going through that stuff is such a huge part of the education. It's not just, okay, I'm going to learn these scales, I'm going to learn these things and have a regimen and a routine. I'm learning things that later on I can apply and function with as a musician, as a player, and that's such a huge part of people who are seeking out a teacher. Is all those elements. It's not just one element. It's a combination. It's a complete package. And it seems like you found that guy, which is
Yeah,
great.
at least the right guy for me, right? And an interesting thing about Rusty too is I forget what we were talking about one day, but it was more of a life thing
Hmm.
that had to do with guitar. And he says to me, he goes, "Have you ever heard of Tim S. Grover?" And I'm like, "I think so." And he's like, "Have you ever read the book Relentless?" And I'm like, "No." And he goes, and it's a self-help book. He's like,
Oh,
"Go read it. Everything you're asking me about, it's all in there." So now I'm
huh.
getting like a therapy session,
Yeah,
right? On
yeah.
top of like
A music
a
lesson.
guitar lesson. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So it's like, I mean, there's like there's no part of the whole, like you said, like he's like an all encompassing teacher. And those are, I just feel incredibly lucky that I was able to, squeak in there,
yeah.
you know, and get it. And I mean, I even stay up past my bedtime for the lesson, you
Yeah,
know,
right.
right? Because he's in Texas and I'm in Connecticut, so there's like there's an
Time
hour difference,
difference.
and I'm like,
Yeah,
oh man, I got to get up at 5 a.m, but I got to do it. Another cup of coffee,
yeah.
let's go.
I
And
was
then
gonna
I finish
say,
the lesson with him. I'm generally wired,
yeah.
right, and I can't
And
fall
you can't
asleep.
sleep. Yeah, it's like as our
Exactly.
parents would say on a school night, and you're still
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Rusty's, yeah, he's great. So like I said, I would highly recommend anybody gets the opportunity to work with him that they definitely should. Or if you just want to hear great guitar playing, right, just go check out Rusty Cooley. He's
Yeah.
amazing,
And I'm
right?
going to include all that stuff in the description below this video, so you'll get to see everything, and click on it and do what you gotta do, to kind of check out this stuff that Jay's mentioning. So you'll see all that stuff in the description. So I'll include that later on.
Cool.
But
Thank you,
yeah,
man.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Thank you for sharing that information with everybody. I think it's an important thing. It's part of the whole process and the journey, right? So leading into the next question, which is great because it's kind of getting into the guitar style question. What is your favorite guitar styles and or genre? And I think you already touched on some of it.
Yeah, so definitely my favorite genre is like the hard rock heavy metal, right? Coming up in the 80s, like listening to George Lynch, even John Petrucci from Dream Theater was another, great big influence on me. Yngwie Malmsteen, like I can remember, I'll never forget. It was my music teacher in high school. I was lucky enough to have a recording studio available to me in my high school, and a music teacher that, even though I was not part of the music department, he he knew I played in the band, and he gave me access to this studio. And the deal was just like, "Jay, if you're here in your study hall, you just have to be doing some kind of work. You have to be able to show me that you're doing stuff." So I used to keep notes on papers, and I could, we were using tape then, right? So tape and
Yeah,
analog
reel to reel. Yeah.
synthesizers with oscillators, and yeah. So he was great. Jim Noga was his name. Just an incredible individual. But I remember he had a slot where all these records were, and usually for him, he was a jazz drummer, so it's all jazz. And I just pulled this record out, and it's like Yingwi Momstein. Like, what is, like?
Yeah.
I don't know what this is. And
Yeah.
he's like, "No, listen to that, right?" I'm like, "Okay." So I threw it on the turntable,
Wow.
and yeah, and I was just like, oh, it was Ingve's. It was like Ingve's Rising Force or something, right?
Resume.
So, and I was like, blown away. Like, who is this guy? And then, of course, he starts telling me, of course, what does he say to me being a jazz drummer? He's like, "Well, yeah, this guy's amazing, but like, it's really, like, what about Alan Holdsworth? Like, listen to this, right? What about Chet
Right.
Atkins? Listen to this." And I was like, "Oh my God, like, these are like real things, right?" Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was cool. So, yeah. So, not to get too far off. But yeah, heavy metal definitely the way to go. And in those were my heroes, right? George Lynch, Yngwie Malmsteen, and for me, seeing it, for those of people who haven't seen Yngwie Malmsteen live, like when I saw Yngwie Malmsteen live, that was like, I'm not gonna lie, it was like, like, I feel like that's how guitar players must have felt like the first time they saw, Jimmy Page.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yep.
that where that came from. You know what I'm saying? Because I had that moment with him. Because anybody that's never seen him live, he's like such an extension of his instrument,
Yes.
right? I mean, he's throwing that thing in the air. When I saw him, he took his guitar off and he put it on the PA speaker,
Yeah.
and he's moving it and he's doing like he's moving it, and it's feeding back properly in tune with the song. I mean, like
Yeah.
what's this guy not doing, right?
Yeah.
It was just incredible. I also one of the things that one of the great things about George Lynch as well is I actually got the chance to I talked to George on the phone.
Oh, sweet.
So as yeah, and this kind of happened. It's kind of what sparked my rebirth. So I had ordered an album, and when I ordered it, I didn't realize like the first 200 people that order this album will get a phone call from George Lynch, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm driving out to dinner, and I I I'm in the car, and it comes up like this. It says like no phone ID, right? But in my work, sometimes I get calls from law enforcement, and that's what comes up.
Oh.
So right. So and I work for the Postal Service and I'm a manager, so it's not like I'm not an FBI agent or anything. But usually it could be a postal inspector and it could be something simple, but I have to answer it, right? So
Right.
I answer the phone and I'm, hi, is this Jay Swift? I'm like, yes, it is. What can I do for you? I say, oh, this is George Lynch. I'm like, okay, sure,
Sure,
fine.
why not?
you
I don't know any
know?
George Lynch.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah, did you pre-order this album? Da, da, da. Yeah, I just got it. And he's like, yeah, I'm just calling. And I
Oh,
talked to
wow.
him for like 10 minutes.
Oh, it's killer.
And we talked about like the fact that I play guitar, which I'm sure that everybody he talked to probably did, right?
Mhm.
But we had a great conversation, not about the '80s. We talked about all his other projects that were coming up,
Yeah.
right? Because I said, hey, this album sounds great, but I heard you're doing this, and this, and it was just an uplifting conversation. I think that he loved it because we talked about new stuff
Yeah.
instead of old stuff. And
Right.
then it was inspiring to me that he's still doing all these totally different projects with all these different people.
Mhm.
And it was kind of what inspired me to like, you know, jump back in. Like I can do this. If he can do it, I can do it. Because as an adult, we all know, like, hey man, we're all adults. It's just work and practice and it takes time, right? So
Yep.
yeah. So it was really cool.
That's
So yeah, so
awesome.
my genre is definitely heavy metal. I do listen to other stuff. I like progressive music. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I'm still an '80s guy, so you're gonna catch me listening to Y&T every once in a while. I love Dave Meniketti, right?
Sure.
You know what I
Right.
mean? And what I like, and
Yeah.
Akira Takasaki from Loudness is incredible. He's one of my favorites. You got Jake, Zach Wild. You know what I mean? Joe Satriani is a big influence on me. Steve Vai is amazing guitar player. The thing about Steve, like when I listen to Joe, it's more like rock and I can get into it and everything else. But when I listen to Steve Vai, and maybe it's my lack of musicianship, but sometimes I listen to Steve Vai and I'm literally like, I don't know what just happened, but I know I like it. You know what I mean? Like I
Right.
can't explain that. I don't know what he did. You know what I'm saying? Because he's very out there sometimes. I mean, obviously, he's musically he's incredible, but
Yep.
sometimes it just kind of goes a little over my head. I don't know if anybody else experiences that with him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's got quite the pedigree in terms of his influences as well, and he's going still on his own journey. He's still like this whole idea of guitar journeys. He's still doing other stuff. He's doing his band, of course, and then of
Mm-hmm.
course he's doing the orchestral stuff. And there's a great YouTube channel with Kip Winger, because Kip Winger writes orchestral music as
Yeah.
well as the music with Winger. So he did an interview with Steve, and they talked about it. And a lot of these things that come up for him musically, especially classical, come from like composers like Ligeti and Xenakis and people like that. So he has a very similar story to you as well, where he discovered a lot of this stuff in high school. His music teacher, Joe and Steve, both had the same music teacher in high school, and their teacher turned them on to all this stuff. Like you went to the vinyl rack and got, okay, pull out this vinyl, put it on, have a listen. They had a very similar story, and I think a lot of us, that are of this age group, and I think age doesn't really matter so much, because you will find somebody in your current situation, a music teacher, that just sees where you're at, and they recognize, okay, here's somebody that's really into music. They can just see it, and they can tell, and that's a sign of a good teacher, that they can recognize that, and they help you along with feeding you these different styles and genres, and that's a huge thing. No matter what your age, no matter where you are if you're still in school and you're watching this and you're seeing us old guys talk about this stuff,
Yeah,
it's the
right.
same. It's the commonality that we all have. We all have this thing with music, and we have people that help us along with that. And of course, we have people who, we won't discuss the other people who don't really kind of resonate with where you're at. But the
Right.
important thing is that you find people and you connect to people, like with this Guitar Journeys thing that we're doing here, there's a connection that happens, that feeds. Even you go back and listen to the older stuff. That's the stuff that got you in there, into what you're doing now. And that never really leaves you. It stays with you because that's the stuff that really lays the foundation, and you grow from that, and it never
Oh yeah.
escapes. It never goes away. And that's an important thing. You mentioned that before. I used to listen to this music, and that's the important stuff that we can't get away from that. And I think it's really something that is just a natural part of being a person. Being inspired. And keeping that inspiration, keeping that talking to George Lynch on the phone. It's like he's like an inspiration, and the fact you get to speak to him is like mind blowing. Because how often does that happen? Really
Yeah,
doesn't
like
happen often.
never. Yeah, I mean, I've seen him I saw him in New Haven Coliseum when he was in Dokken. I've seen him a bunch of times in Lynch Mob, right? But you're still 30 feet away from the stage, or if you're in a club or something like that, and he's not coming to sit at the bar and talk with you after the show,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and he's another, great live guitar player that's
Yeah.
fun to watch.
Yeah.
Lynch Mob was, I've seen them a bunch of times, and they're awesome. So,
Mhm.
and that's another thing. As an adult, I've gone and seen a lot of live shows. I didn't see concerts for like 30 years,
Yeah.
right? Like I didn't go. Like, and I mean, I think in the last like 5 years, I've probably seen Iron Maiden 5 times,
Wow.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've finally got to see Priest. I've seen like Lynch Mob a few times, and a bunch of other bands, Ingve a few times, Dream Theater, every single time they come around, and I said, I got to see Petrucci on his like solo tour with Mike Portnoy, which was, really great. So, which is an education in and of itself,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
so it's just watching them play, or it's just like, and to see them do it live, and you're to listen to Petrucci live, he's so tight. Like everything he does is just, it's so tight. As a guitar player, you're like it's inspirational. Like,
Yeah.
like how do you get to that? And I mean, I'm lucky enough that every week when I have my lesson with Rusty Cooley, I get to see it, and I'd be like, oh man, I got a ways to go. You know?
Yeah, it's funny, and that's the other thing too. That sometimes, like you mentioned, that like you're seeing a player who's in front of you and they're doing it, and you're taking lessons from them. It's the one thing that's a tricky element to get around is the comparative part, because that's something that I've seen with students. They compare themselves to somebody else. Not that you're doing that, but it's one thing I can mention in these Guitar Journeys episodes is that whenever comparisons come up, like, oh, I never get to that level of playing. It's like that's the one thing that's a little tricky to dance around, because it can be something that can pull you in a adverse direction. Not that that's happening with you. You're just basically inspired, and that's the thing too, is like finding those players and those teachers that continue to inspire you, and not go into the comparative mode, because that's danger all around. You don't want to get anywhere near that scene. So
Yeah. I
it's very
completely agree with you, and I think that one of the super important things to keep in mind, I think for anybody that's playing guitar, is that, like, as I just said, like I said, like, I'll watch Rusty Cooley play something, and I'll be like, wow, I still have a pretty long way to go. But when I say that, I'm just talking in actual technical expertise. Okay, so like I have Rusty's amazing, but I didn't go there so I could sound like him, right? And as artists, we all sound a little different, right? So to sit here and say, like, who's the better guitar player, Joe Satriani or Joe Bonamassa? I've seen both those guys live, right? And they're both incredible. I'm not even a blues guy. I got dragged by a friend of mine because I made him go see Yngwie Malmsteen because he's a blues guy. He's an SRV guy, right?
yeah.
And I was like, no, come see Yngwie. He's great. So then he's like, all right, man, well, you got to come see Joe with me. So I was like,
Okay.
fair's fair. I'll
Right.
go, right? I was completely blown away. I mean, he was incredible. Like, what a show. I
Yeah.
mean, unbelievable, right? But like, it's apples and oranges. You can't make the comparison. right? So I
Yeah.
mean, so like as you're learning to play guitar, the real trick of learning any instrument is, yes, you can be technically proficient and you can be really good at it, but you want to be you,
Mhm.
right? Don't ever try to be somebody else. Just be you, right? If you want to learn to play fast, all right, learn to play fast.
Yeah.
But don't ever think, hey, I'm not good enough because I'm not as fast as Rusty Cooley or Yngwie Malmsteen, if that's what you were looking for,
Right.
or I'm not as soulful as Eric Clapton, or I can't play it just like Jimi Hendrix did. No, play it like you want to play it. If it
Yeah.
feels good to you, if it feels good and it sounds good, it is good.
Right.
And if you like it, someone else will like it.
Right.
Because as much as we'd like to say that we're all individuals and everything else, but there's people like you and me, we like the same kinds of music, right? So
Yeah.
we're probably going to gravitate towards the same thing. That's
Right.
You say the same thing for an 18-year-old kid or a 50-year-old kid, because we
Right.
are
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah.
Right. But
Yep.
that's it. So yeah, like you said, comparison's not a good thing to do. Be yourself. Don't be afraid to be, right?
Yep.
Because people, if you're confident and you be yourself, people will like you. That is it.
Yep.
That's the truth.
That's a huge takeaway, and that's why you're here to share these things with us. Because that's the thing. We're all going through what we're going through, and thank goodness we have music and we have our guitar, and we can you know satisfy a lot of good things with it.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely therapeutic as well. But yeah, it's great. It allows you to be an individual, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Without actually saying a word,
Right.
which is
Exactly.
which is that's a neat trick if you ask me,
Yeah, it
right?
is. It is. Yep. Totally.
It's
Totally.
cool.
And that leads us perfectly into the next question for you. And have you realized your goals on the guitar?
Yeah. So, no. So I'm gonna be like, right. So I am happy with the progress that I've made, and to be honest, and I practice until my hands cramp up. Sometimes, I did a 2 hour show with a band I play with called the Blameless Project, and
Oh,
they're a Christian band, and we did an outdoor show. And this was actually last year at this time, but it was a 2 hour show. It was 95 degrees on a concrete stage, and the sun just happened to be at a point when we went on that we weren't covered,
oh no.
right? So it was
Okay.
two-hour show,
Yeah.
and it's a rock band, so we're a very high energy band. I do a lot of moving around. I don't stand still, and so whenever the show's over, we pack up and we get in the car. I am driving home. And my left hand is cramping, like I can't even put it on the steering wheel anymore. And I
Oh,
drank, like I was drank the day before, I drank that morning, right? You know what I mean? Water, not alcohol, right? You
right.
know what I mean? So like,
Yes.
I was
Be
ready, but
hydrated.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I've played until like I've played and practiced until like my hands literally don't work anymore. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can say that I've actually done that. But
Yeah.
I'm happy with my progress, and I think that also it's the great thing about music is that it's a lifetime of learning,
Mhm.
right? And you're always inspired because there's always new music, whether you're just talking to a friend or your teacher who's, like might say like, hey, have you ever heard of Arch Enemy? Well, you should probably check them out. They're really good.
Mhm.
Right. You know what I mean? Or have you ever heard of Meshuggah, or you ever heard of Jeff Loomis? Do you know who that is? Well, go check out his stuff. Right. And like,
Yeah.
I didn't know who Michael Lee Firkins is, but like Rusty Cooley's like, no, go check out Michael Lee Firkins. He's really good. And then that's how you get inspired to learn new things and do more things. And so yeah, I don't think I'll ever be satisfied. And
Yeah.
I mean that in a good way. Like I think that's a good thing,
Yeah.
right? Because you want to be driven to be better at all times, and I guarantee you that even the best guitar players in the world, the very best guitar players in the world, pick up their guitar and start playing around and trying to learn new stuff or try to come up with something different every day, because we're creative people. That's what we do,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I think the path to being miserable is to not do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Not
So
not doing what you love is very hard to live with.
right.
Whatever it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be guitar. It could be anything. So to have something that we have, is it doesn't matter if it's guitar or not. It just happens to be guitar. But yes,
Right.
it's the thing that when you look into other players, even the well-known players, you start to see things like, oh yeah, they're going through the same things that I'm going through, in terms of creative avenues, progress with the instrument, and just life stuff. We're all people, so we're all going through these different things, and we have these challenges. And guitar could be one of those challenges. But as I mentioned in an earlier episode, that's a good thing. Like you just said, this is all good stuff, to have these problems that we have, with guitar playing. These are great problems to have. It could be a hell of a lot worse, and it's not. So that's the thing that having that
Oh
goal
yeah,
is.
it definitely is a positive thing. And also in today's world too, which is a lot different than when we were coming up, is that you in today's world, because of social media and YouTube and things like that, like you have access.
Yes.
Right. So like you have rock stars or guitar players or musicians that are telling their stories, that are doing podcasts, that are saying, hey, this is like doing exactly what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have this back in the 80s, right? So, I was just like, oh my God, George Lynch is a god, right? You know what I mean? Like, he's just amazing. And I'm thinking like, the guy wakes up in the morning, so he lives in a house, one of Rusty's, a friend of Rusty's kid, actually, when they found out that like, Rusty was a friend of theirs, the kid was like, oh my God, does he live in a house of gold? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? But that was kind of the feeling we had about like Motley Crue and, and Def Leppard and all these guys. Like we're not even, thinking that they're having a bad day. Right. Or that Mutt Lange made Joe Elliott cry when he didn't want to do take 185. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like we don't know these things until we find out years later, like what was going on. So today it's just such a great, tool to have available to actually hear these stories that like, oh man, like I was really struggling at that point, and then you find out how they got through that struggle.
Yeah.
Right. And then how they got to where they are, which is inspiring. Again,
yes,
you can put things in perspective for you when you realize that your heroes are just as flawed as you are. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
And you're not alone, even though people, with internet stuff, and doing the stuff online with social media can be a very isolating thing. But on the complete opposite end of things, it's very open. Like you mentioned, access, it's a great word because we have that. We have accessibility to these players and we learn from them and we learn from each other, which is the heart of, this type of format, doing this guitar journey thing, is that we have commonality, even though it can feel like divided and very isolated. It really isn't. It's very wide spanning. We all have these things. We have these basic needs that we all share. And when we share our stories, the community starts to build a bit, and we see, okay, he's a rock star, but okay, well, he has to go out and take the garbage out, It's like,
right.
You are just
there's not somebody that does that for him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's going out and cutting the grass and everything else.
Right, exactly.
So you have that too. You have people who are just very basic, and like they have those basic core things, and it comes from what you're inspired by. It really does.
Which is true. Some great stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. When you really like, we didn't know this stuff, like you said, coming up, we had no idea what the backstory was.
No.
Now we do. It's like, oh, wow. Okay.
Right.
Now this makes sense.
Yeah, like in the 80s, we had no idea what it was really like being a guitar player in Ozzy's band.
Yeah.
You didn't know, waking up every morning. Like, who would have thought that Jakey Lee would wake up every single morning going, I wonder if I'm going to get fired today. You know what I mean? Like, and this is a guy who we're like, oh my God, like he's such an amazing guitar player. Right. But like if Ozzy was having a bad day, well, Ozzy was getting a new guitar player. Right. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you just, so we don't, the ins and outs of like how tough that all of that was for them. We have no idea. Or George Lynch being fired by Ozzy twice.
Right.
Poor guy, right? And in one of those times, if I have the story correct, he had accepted the job. He was married and had a kid, and he was working as a union truck driver delivering, liquor to liquor stores. Wow. So he had a job.
Yeah.
And he left that job, went to Europe, and he was playing, like there was the sound checks to get ready to tour with them. And they brought in Jake.
Wow.
And they fired him.
Right.
Just cold, just like, yeah, Jake's in, you're out.
Yeah.
And now he's in Europe. He quit his job. You know what I mean? So, I'm just saying you don't, obviously George got through that. George was able to get together back with Doc and they signed a record so he was right. It all worked out, but I didn't know that happened. You find out years later that those
Yeah.
were the trials that these guys went through, right? So
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
said, it's when to see them go through that and then to still reach their goals is inspiring. So
It totally is. That's the thing.
yeah,
It's like you never, if you don't lose sight of what your goal is, you're gonna get there no matter what. Whatever it gets thrown in your direction, you're gonna be able to totally get there. And it's sometimes it's hard to remember that. It's easy to forget that. But again, examples are shown. Like we learn about these people, and it's like, oh wow, that's how. What the hell do you do if you're in Europe, a different country, and now you're like you're out of a job? It's like, well, do I get any money to go home? Like it's like, how do I
right,
get home?
exactly.
But
Yeah,
it
and then
all
on
works
top of
out.
that, the worst part is that not only are you going home, now you got to go home and tell your wife that you just got let go.
Yeah.
And like and that's not something I want. That's not a conversation I want to have. And it's
Yeah.
not even that your wife's gonna give you a hard time, but like as the father, like it's your job to care for that family,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a lot of pressure there.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So again, to see these guys rise up above these, these all these roadblocks that were put in front of them and still end up where they were. It's pretty amazing. So
Yeah.
that's so there are times when like maybe I'm maybe struggling a little bit, like when I'm practicing or whatever, and I'm like, oh, okay, like it's not that bad.
Yeah. It's like, what would George do?
I'm gonna, what George do, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm gonna be fine. It's gonna be okay. You know what I mean? So it's gonna be all right. So yeah, definitely. So everybody should use that resource. Go on YouTube, watch these, read these guys' life stories, and see what they have to say. Listen to what they have to say because it's important. You can learn a lot from these guys.
Hell yeah, absolutely. It's
Yeah,
perspective. You get to get that healthy perspective. Like it's things aren't so bad as I thought they were because this person went through X, Y, and Z, and okay, well, I got to get my act together. So
yeah, exactly.
you know,
Right.
and another great segue into the next and final question, as we come to a close, is what keeps you playing the guitar?
So what keeps me playing the guitar? I mean, obviously I want to improve as a guitar player. One of my favorite things to do is to play live. And that like my main goal at this point, and one of the reasons I started playing guitar again was that I wanted to play live. And my main goal is that I want to get back up to, I want to get to the point where I'm out there playing festivals. Like in front of a large crowd. I've always wanted to do that. I've played in front of hundreds, right? But that's, ultimately I want to get to a point where enough people, know who I am and are listening to my music and enjoying my music that I could, play, to thousands of people rather than just hundreds. And I'm slowly, working my way up the ladder for that. But that's, that keeps me playing guitar and, and I don't know how you are, but as in today's world and everything that's going on, right? Like, okay, the electric bill's due tomorrow, right? I'm going to go to the grocery store tomorrow. Oh, I got to get the car tuned up. When's the mortgage due? You're like, all these life things that are going on, how's my music career doing? How's this song doing? I can honestly say that when I'm playing the guitar, I don't think of anything else. I can literally check out and just play and enjoy it. It's the only thing I do where I completely check out and I just live in the moment. And even if I'm on stage and playing in front of a crowd, I still get that feeling. So and it's therapeutic. It feels good all the time, every time. It just does. And that's how much I love to play. It's just that like there is I've never gotten any kind of negativity from it at all. It's been a positive experience. Even when I was trying to learn how to play when the Saints come marching in, never was I screaming at the guitar like, "Why isn't it working?"
Yeah.
It was never been like that for me. And I don't want to make it sound like it wasn't easy for me to learn how to play guitar. Like I struggled just as much as anybody else, but it's yeah, it's definitely a labor of love, and that's really that's it. It just every aspect of playing guitar is just brings me joy,
Yeah.
and that's really what it comes down to. It's that simple.
As the guys in Spinal Tap would say, have a good time all the time.
That's right.
And that's what guitar. It's like one of those outlets that's like one thing people need is a healthy outlet, and that's guitar is one of those healthy outlets. Where you're doing everything, you're making it all happen. Whatever comes out of that instrument is from you, And, I tell my students the same thing. It's like, when you go home to practice, you're really playing. It's not really practice. You're making music, whatever it sounds like. It could sound like complete, you know, garbage, but it doesn't matter. It's like, it's, you could be doing a lot worse things than, than not playing your instrument. So, look at it that way. It's like, and, having this whole thing that we're talking about is really designed for that. It's like, think of it as a really healthy outlet, and that should inspire you. You should have your goals set up, what you want to do. You should have your inspired players, research, find your players that you like, that you got into for the first time. All these things, the desire to play live is something that we mentioned access before. YouTube is amazing. I mean, it's like, start a channel, get yourself out there, play, make videos. It's all, people who are a lot younger are doing that already. It's nothing brand new, but the accessibility part is such a thing that was such a big takeaway from what you mentioned earlier, to have the access. That's the main thing, and to use it for good. Yeah. Use the force for good.
Use the force for good. Right. It's important. And there's also, like, it's funny, you mentioned like whether you're practicing and you sound like garbage. I want to make a point in I think this is important, is that when you practice, you should sound like garbage. Right? Because if you're practicing and you're like, man, I sound amazing, you're not pushing yourself.
Right.
Like, that's not practice. Practice should be like, oh, I'm so close, right? Yep. That's what practice should feel like.
Right.
And, and I'm not suggesting that we all need to be frustrated, but like, that's what it's like when I'm practicing. You practice and it doesn't sound right. And then, you're practicing a pattern, and then suddenly one time it sounded right. Like, oh, that's what it's supposed to. And then 2 times, and then 3 times, and then you're playing it properly all the time. Then it's time to move on to another pattern. You still go back and practice that pattern in your warm-ups or however you're doing it, but like, that's what practice is supposed to be. So anybody watching this, if you're starting to play guitar and everything else and you sound awful, it's okay. That's the way you're supposed to sound when you're practicing. It will get better. And when it does, it'll be awesome, and you'll feel like $1 million, right? So that's super important,
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure we got that out there.
That is a perfect way to close this episode. And like I mentioned earlier in the episode, excuse me, losing my voice. I'm going to include all the stuff that you mentioned, Blameless Project. It's all going to be in here. You can check out Jay's music, his website. There's a lot of great stuff there to check out, and a lot of great music to listen to. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. And there's more of these episodes coming up. I hope you felt some inspiration from this episode. I know I did. And Jay, thank you so much for doing this. I know we spent some time discussing all these things beforehand, and it's fantastic that you were able to accommodate and be here, and I'm glad that you are here.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been great.
You're very welcome. So on that note, guys, I will let you guys go, and stay tuned for future episodes. Keep your eyes peeled, and we'll talk to you real soon. Take care.
Bye. Take care, everybody. Thank you.